Divorce. When church people talk about divorce, it usually comes with a lot of judgment, hypocrisy, and rejection. Why? Well, because Jesus said divorce is bad. But maybe something else is going on. Maybe Jesus' teaching and critique of divorce has nothing to do with rejection and judgment. Maybe Jesus was trying to tell us how much he loves us, whether we're divorced or not. So, let's talk about it together. Marriage can be so awesome. It can be a source of love and joy and peace and security and comfort and companionship and family. Marriage is amazing, except when it's not. Maybe you've experienced this. Maybe you are experiencing this. Maybe you're watching your parents or your friends or your siblings experience this. See, nothing can suck the joy out of your life. Nothing can give you more anxiety, make you feel more unseen or unheard, or nothing can make you more miserable than a horrible marriage. Nothing ruins a life like a bad marriage. And sometimes it can be so bad that we just want it to end. So we file for divorce. But of course that brings its own pain and complications and hurt and regret. So what if there's another option? What if there's something we can do before we reach that point that can not only make our marriage survivable, but can actually make our marriage a source of joy and peace and comfort and love? And what if there's a way to move beyond past divorces and have hope for our current or future marriage? I think there is. And I think it can revolutionize our marriages. It has revolutionized my marriage. But before we get going, I think there's got to be 3 points we make. First of all, and I'll say this later also, but when we're talking about marriage and divorce, I am not talking about an abusive marriage. Despite what some former pastor or former Christian told you, God doesn't want you to stay in an abusive relationship or expose yourself or your family to any type of abuse. So if you're in that situation, reach out to us, get help, get out of that situation. Now, second, if you're single or widowed, I think there's going to be something in this for you too. And I want you to remember that being married is not like the pinnacle of Christian life, and not being married doesn't make you less than somehow. Jesus was never married. The Apostle Paul said it was better not to be married. And third, if you're not a Jesus follower and you're checking this out to see what Christians or whatever talk about divorce, listen, what I'm about to say, you don't have to do any of it. Nobody expects you to do any of it. You're completely off the hook. But I still think you might discover something wonderful and beautiful about marriage, and something that actually might help your marriage too. Because here's what we will all discover. Marriage is a picture of God's love and faithfulness. So, as Jesus was making his way to Jerusalem to announce himself as king, then to be arrested and executed, he walks through the region where John the Baptist used to teach. And some of our old friends, the Pharisees, enter the story once again. Then Jesus left Capernaum and went down to the region of Judea and into the area east of the Jordan River. Once again, crowds gathered around him, and as usual, he was teaching them. Some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question: should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? And when you read this, we're like, ooh, divorce. Nice trap, Pharisees. But why is this a trap? Well, one of the reasons might be because divorce is the topic that got John the Baptist arrested and killed by the king, Herod Antipas, because he had married his brother's ex-wife. His wife had divorced his brother to marry him. And this family was divorcing and remarrying and actually executing each other all over the place. And John the Baptist had spoke out against it, and that's what got him killed. Another reason this might have been a trap is because the Pharisees knew Jesus had some extreme views and sometimes seemed to contradict their religious law that they got from Moses in the Jewish scriptures. And so maybe they're hoping to set him against Mosaic law, and so they'll discredit him and he'll lose his following. Because the wording of the question is actually, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And at that time, all scholars agreed that, yeah, it was lawful for a man to divorce his wife. So maybe they're trying to trap him there. Maybe it's a mix with Herod and all of that. We don't know for sure, but somehow this is a trap. And Jesus is ready for it. Jesus answered them with a question. What did Moses say in the law about divorce? Well, he permitted it, they replied. He said a man can give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away. And so Jesus says, what did Moses say? And they quote to him the law that we find in Deuteronomy 24. And this law of giving her a certificate of divorce was actually a way to keep women from being exploited in this ancient world. And so the thinking at the time of Jesus was, with the scholars and all that, was that men could divorce their wives for any reason as long as they gave them that certificate of divorce that Moses said they needed to give them. And only men had the right to divorce. It was unlawful for a woman to divorce her husband. And from the ancient sources, we see that men could divorce their wives if she didn't accept their control, if they didn't like her behavior, if she spoiled a meal, or really any other cause. Why? Because they're the man. They can do what they want, and if the woman doesn't obey or whatever, they can just replace her. And so, in this male dominated culture, divorce became a way to control the wives. And think of the leverage this gave the man in the marriage over his wife. Like, think how oppressive this would have been. Think of the constant stress of walking on eggshells the wives had to deal with. Like, you could never speak your mind. You could never look annoyed or angry or roll your eyes. You could never talk back or even express your feelings or be angry or sad. You had to do everything exactly the way your husband said, or you could be replaced. And in this culture, women were economically and socially reliant on their fathers and then their husbands. And a divorced woman who didn't find a new husband very quickly would be in real danger. She'd be incredibly vulnerable, and she could end up on the streets doing whatever she had to do to survive. But the husband didn't have to worry about any of that because, well, he's following the law, so he's okay. Just because we're following the rules doesn't mean we're being loving. And Jesus isn't going to let these guys get away with it. But Jesus responded, he wrote this commandment only as a concession to your hard hearts. Jesus says, your hearts are so hard, so dead to the true way of God that you've created this divorce situation. And Moses was just giving you a way to navigate it with as little damage as possible. You've forgotten God's intention for marriage in the first place. And you like Moses so much that, let's look back at the beginning of humanity, what Moses first wrote in the first book of the Jewish scriptures. But God made them male and female from the beginning of creation. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. And Jesus says this is a much bigger deal than you think. This goes to the very purpose of marriage and the heart of God. And so he quotes from the original creation story. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And Jesus says, just because you're men doesn't give you the right to treat your wives this way. See, as Moses said, all humans, regardless of gender, are equally and fully created in the image of God. All of humanity was created to be loved by God and to love him and each other. And as we said at the beginning, God created marriage to be a picture of this love and faithfulness, which is why Jesus then again quotes Genesis. He says, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife. So what's that all about? Because in the cultural context that Genesis was written, it was actually the other way around. See, sons didn't leave their homes when they got married, especially in agrarian cultures where they were all needed to work on the farm. The new wife would leave her family and move in with the husband's family, and then the son would continue working in the family business. So what's being described here is not some physical leaving and going off and living with his wife's family. No, what Moses was describing, what Jesus is quoting, is a leaving, a transformation, a realignment of family ties or kinship bonds. And these two people leave their former family ties and create a new family bond that's just as real, just as permanent, and even supersedes their first family of origin. And so the original wording is these two will become one flesh, two lives, two people becoming one. Marriage is the bonding of two people into one new living family. And Jesus is saying you can't break the bonds of your flesh and blood family, right? Your sister will always be your sister, your brother will always be your brother, your father and mother will always be your father and mother, your kids will always be your kids. And since marriage creates an even stronger bond, then divorce would be the same as disowning your parents or your siblings or your children. And denying the commitments and the responsibilities and even the obligations that families had to each other was like the ultimate source of shame in that society. And Jesus says, from the beginning, this is what marriage was designed to be, something closer than even our family of origin. God's design for marriage is a lifelong commitment of self-sacrificial love. And so Jesus says, with all of this, let no one split apart what God has joined together. And the phrase joined together is more like yoked together. So picture two horses pulling a cart together, right? They have equal and mutual dependence. They're both working toward the same goal, both walking down the same road, both carrying the same burdens. See, marriage wasn't designed simply to be about mutual satisfaction, but it's also about a shared purpose and ministry of raising children, of guiding grandchildren, of caring for and loving your family and each other and friends and neighbors and the community as a whole. See, marriage isn't about fulfilling our own dreams. Marriage is about showing the world God's love together. And as the scriptures progressed from Moses in Genesis to the later history of the Jewish people, God used marriage as a picture to describe his relationship with the people of Israel. The care that he gave the people was like a spouse caring for the other. The rebellion of the people of worshiping idols and that type of stuff was like them cheating on him. But he refused to let them go. He refused to disown them. He remained faithful and kept accepting them back. Remember, marriage is designed to illustrate God's love and faithfulness. And Jesus says, once you enter into this relationship, God joins you together. And just because you say this union is over doesn't mean God, the one who made it, says it's over. That's actually not up to you. So what God brings together, what God uses to show the world his love and faithfulness, no one should split apart. And God says to these men, you've taken this beautiful picture of God's love and twisted it into an oppressive system of exploitation. Stop being hard-hearted towards God's will. Be a picture of faithfulness by being faithful to your spouse. Now, let me stop there and say, if you find this difficult, or maybe it creates more questions than answers, you're in good company. See, what Jesus was saying was so different from the culture at the time, that so different from what any of the disciples had heard before in their lives, that they needed a lot more clarification. Later, when he was alone with his disciples in the house, they brought up the subject again. He told them, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery against her. And if a woman divorces her husband and marries someone else, she commits adultery. I know, that's heavy. But first, notice that he said the husband commits adultery against his wife, and that if the wife divorces, then she commits adultery against her husband. And that actually is showing a remarkable equality of the sexes for that time. It's pretty amazing what Jesus is doing here. But also, let's picture these teenage guys who've been raised in a patriarchal society. Teenage guys are pretty bad anyway. And they've been told their whole lives that the men get to decide with marriage and all that type of stuff. And they're like, wait, we can't just divorce our wives when we want. This is so against our culture. What will this do to our society? We're the men. What we say goes. Men need to be strong and have the leadership. And Jesus says, guys, don't you get, I am bringing a different world. In the kingdom of God, the kingdom I'm bringing, the kingdom I'm the king of, things will be different. And yeah, what Jesus says here seems kind of extreme, even harsh. But if he is commanding us to let go of our hard-heartedness, then he must be willing to offer us some kind of cure. And so what Jesus is saying here is Moses gave you a concession for divorce because your hearts were hard. But now a time is coming where I will give you a new heart, the time promised through the prophet Ezekiel. And I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. And I will put my spirit in you so that you will follow my decrees and be careful to obey my regulations. See, in the kingdom of God, Jesus will soften hearts. He will repair them to reflect the image of God and even make it possible for marriage to become the picture of God's love. And so Jesus says to the boys, follow my way, follow my kingdom, and I will soften your hearts so that this question of divorce won't even be necessary. If our hearts are transformed by Jesus, then his commands about divorce will rarely be needed. But none of us are perfectly transformed yet, and sometimes divorce does happen. So what do we do with this? What do we do with what Jesus is saying? So yes, God's will is that every marriage experiences his love and his grace and his transformation and becomes a mirror of that love to the rest of the world. And yes, God hates divorce. Why? Because divorce hurts people. Every divorce sends ripples of hurt and pain that maybe we don't even see. And divorce is never good, but it can be necessary. See, we can't do with this passage what has been done to millions of women throughout the centuries of exerting a husband's control over his wife. See, for centuries, this passage has been used by men to tell women that no matter what, you can't divorce your husband. It doesn't matter what abuse you're having to suffer or your kids are having to suffer and endure. You cannot split apart what God has joined together. You have to stay with your husband or God is mad at you and maybe you might even go to hell. This teaching, this thinking has literally killed women and children in abusive families. Jesus is not saying to stay in a dangerous marriage, a dangerous relationship with no hope of ever finding someone to actually become one flesh with again. See, Jesus is not giving us a list of rules and contingencies about divorce and marriage. He's showing what marriage was designed to be, why it's such a big deal, and why divorce is so serious. See, no matter what the circumstances are, A broken marriage is a picture of our broken humanity. But because of that brokenness, sometimes divorce is necessary for safety and health. Divorce is the result of hard hearts and a refusal to love as we were created to love. And that abusive spouse has already broken that kinship, that one flesh bond. So that's not on you. They may not have left physically, but they have chosen with their abuse to sever those family bonds. Now also, this passage has been used to create guilt and shame on people who have been divorced. So if you have been divorced, whether you're remarried or not, what do we do? What should we do with what Jesus said? And this is where the picture of marriage is such good news. Because remember, marriage was designed to show the love and faithfulness of God. And when we look at marriage as God designed it, what do we see? We see faithfulness. We see love. We see acceptance and forgiveness and second and third and fourth chances. We see grace, patience, and unending commitment. And yes, your marriage ended because we are broken. But that brokenness doesn't make God reject you. It makes God run to you. The relationship God offers us through Jesus is everything that is right with marriage and more. And where your marriage was broken, Jesus offers you his love. He offers to make you into his family now and forever. It's a bond he will never break, and it's a bond that even you can't break. No matter how unfaithful we've been, he never lets go. He is committed to us closer than any family tie will ever be. He is for you and for you becoming who you were always created to be. He is there to support you and comfort you and give you joy and peace and forgiveness and love. So whether you are divorced, married, remarried, single, widowed, here are 3 ideas to navigate marriage, divorce, and remarriage. First, accept God's unending commitment to you. What does that look like? What does God's love actually look like toward us? Well, read 1 Corinthians 13, what has kind of become the wedding passage. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. See, that passage is not just for weddings. It actually describes God's love for you and the type of love he can create in us if we let him. And then second, accept and acknowledge our brokenness. See, we accept our role in breaking God's image of love in our marriage and any relationship, really. And maybe that means going and asking your ex-spouse, if appropriate, going and asking your ex-spouse for forgiveness. And maybe, if it's appropriate, being willing to explore counseling and reconciliation. And then, third, allow God's Holy Spirit to work in you and transform your current or future marriage into the picture it was designed to be. And that can start now, where you are, to reclaim that picture of God's love for the world. I know it takes 2 to make a marriage work, but often that work starts with one person. Remember, marriage was designed to show the world the love and faithfulness of God. And so the best way to do that right now is to ask, in this marriage, in this disagreement, in this petty little squabble we're having, in this moment, what does Jesus' love look like? And then allow Jesus to love that person through you. And ask God to give you the strength and the wisdom to assume the best of your spouse, to realize they are broken too, and to offer them the love and forgiveness and grace and support that Jesus offers you every day. And if we do that, not just for our marriages, but for every relationship, our lives will change forever. See, marriage was created to show the world God's love for them. If you are a Jesus follower, our role is to show the world who Jesus is with our lives and with our love. And our marriages can be a billboard to the world of who Jesus really is, even in the mundane daily stuff, in the highest times and even the lowest times. Marriage can be a picture of what it means to serve and love and lay down our lives for the good of someone else. And in the process, we'll not only enjoy better, more fulfilling relationships, we'll come to know even better how loved and accepted and adored we are by our Heavenly Father. And when people look at us, they will see his love for them. Jesus' commitment to us empowers us to be committed to each other. Thanks for watching and listening, especially if this is your first time. If If you liked what you saw and heard, click like and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. We are a church in Salem, Oregon, and you can find out more about who we are and what we do at yourcrosscreek.com. And we love questions and conversations, so reach out to us at info@yourcrosscreek.com. And we are a nonprofit. We don't really exist without support from people just like you. So if you want to keep this good thing going, you can donate at yourcrosscreek.com/donate. And until we see you again, keep loving and stay classy, Salem.